guys, Samantha from Jessima Tutorials here, and today I'm going to be going through all the ins and outs when it comes to silk screening, specifically with the silk screens that I make, design and supply on my Etsy store, Jessima Design. Or specifically silk screens that have a sticky back. So I'm going to be going through a couple points. The first point is going to be acrylic paints. Now I've separated it out into 4 different categories. You have the regular acrylic paints, which is a nice smooth consistency, and you'll see that in just a moment. I'm going to show you how metallic acrylic paints look, because they do end up looking different. I am going to show thicker acrylic paints because that can cause a little bit of problems, and I'm also going to show what thin acrylic paints look like. So those are what I'm going to go through. So let's start off with what the ideal effect should be. I've just got regular white polymer clay here, and I'm just going to smooth it down onto my tile so that there's no air bubbles. And this is how you would silk screen regularly in an ideal situation. And I'm going to use this silk screen as an example. You peel off the backing and you place it shiny side down onto the clay, and then you give it a very light smooth down so that there's no gaps between your silk screen and your clay. Then you're going to want a nice card swipe, something to swipe the paint across the clay. Give your acrylic paint a shake before using it, and then when you open that up, it should be a nice smooth consistency. The best example I have of this is if you've had any kind of thick soup before. It should hold its shape, but it shouldn't be like really in clumps. And then you're going to just smooth that across the surface like so, and then lift that up, and that should give you the best result. Then I'm going to clean that screen. Okay, and then once the silk screen has been cleaned and has dried, then I would move on to screening again. If you planned on screening multiple times. Now I will go into depth on how to how to clean these later on, because there's a couple points I want to cover there. For now I am just going to show the difference in paints. Now metallic paints you want to be a little careful with. You want to get metallic paints that have fine metallic particles. If the particles are too big, they won't go through the screen and it will give you a grainy effect. You also want to make sure that you give them a good shake before using them, because you want to stir up all of those metallic particles. And again, you want essentially the same consistency. You're going to take that, you're going to swipe that across the surface, and you really don't need a lot of paint. And you're just going to swipe that across. And our acrylic paints, metallic paints are always going to give you a slightly grainy effect, simply because they're not as opaque as regular silk screens. So when you're working with it, you want to leave a little bit of a thicker layer of paint than you might usually leave on top of the silk screen before lifting it up. That way it will give you a more consistent colour. And then let's just grab this and lift that up. And there you can see that printed really nicely, but it is a lot lighter than the one that I did before. Again, clean that immediately. Okay, and now I'm going to demonstrate some paints that might not necessarily be the right consistency. Now I'm again going to smooth that down, making sure it's good and stuck. Okay, and I'm going to work with both paints at the same time, because the silk screen, each time you use it, it will get a little bit more wet if you're using it in a rapid succession, I guess, like I'm doing now. And these silk screens, ideally they're best used when they're dry. So if you use a silk screen more than twice or 3 times, you're going to start to see that it's quite soft, and you need to leave it for about 5 to 10 minutes to dry properly. So I don't want to wet and then use the silk screen again, not without having to leave it for a bit. Anyway, I'm going to open these paints up, and these are an example of the wrong consistency. I'm going to work with the runny one, and you can see that that just kind of splurts out, and see how it is rapidly spreading there. It is way too thin. And then I've just realized that I'm silk screening on white, so this is not going to show up. But anyway, I will go and find a runnier paint, but hopefully you can see there that it is very, very runny. This is the wrong consistency. Okay. And I'll do this again with a different colour paint to demonstrate this. And this is an example of too thick. It's just on the verge. You could still use this, but it's a little too thick for my liking. It takes a lot to silk screen it through, and the biggest problem with it being thick is that generally it will dry quicker. The same with the thin ones. The thin ones, it will actually bleed through the pattern a lot of the time, but it also dries quite quickly. Let me see if I can give this a little bit of a stain so that I can show that. But there we go, I'm going to lift that up. This one is okay, but it's a little bit on the too thick side. You definitely don't want it thicker than that. And I'm going to lift that up. And there you can see with this one that it's really bled out quite a bit. This one is actually okay. Don't go any thicker than that. I don't have thicker paints than that because it just doesn't go through the screen. So this is kind of, let me just pop that down there. This is a mousse-like effect. It doesn't really spread out on its own. I still would recommend this thickness of paint, but this actually will still work. Alright, I just wanted to clean that silk screen quickly. But yes, going over the thick paints again, I find that I have more trouble with thick paints that are metallic because the metallic particles don't really go through as well as they should. So if you're using metallic paint, I would definitely recommend a little bit on the thinner side. You can use thick paints as I showed here, but don't go thicker than this. It still needs to be a nice smooth consistency. If it's coming out kind of blotchy and it's not coming out in a nice smooth ribbon when you are putting the paint down onto the silk screen to screen, then it is too thick. But really when it comes to paint, the one that you want to avoid is the too thin one, because that will just bleed through the pattern. Let me just lift that up. I'm not sure if you can see, but it comes out really watery and just not a lot of fun. And you can see that the colour isn't consistent. It will almost come out with like a dendritic effect because it's too wet, and it also really dries quickly on the screen, and I find that I end up damaging screens because I don't get the paint off in time. So that's really the run through when it comes to paint. And now I'm going to move on to powders. Paint, generally you can't really go wrong unless you get like a really watery paint, but with powders and later on inks you definitely can get some problem items. Now I'm going to use another silk screen, and I'm going to lift that off the plastic backing again. Okay, and I'm just going to pop that down again, making sure that you give it a good old burnish. You don't want to feel any air bubbles, but don't press too hard either. Alright, and now this one is the ideal powder. It's a nice fine flowery powder. This one is okay. It's a little coarser as far as particles go, but this will also be okay. You might find that the image is a little light if the powders are a little coarse. If you want a strong image, go with a powder that is nice and fine. But this one is okay. The one that you really don't want to go with is when the grains are really quite large, in a way that it's essentially glitter. Glitter just doesn't go through the screens very well, and I am going to demonstrate that. So I'm going to start with the really light soft powder, and it should dust on like this. And this goes for chalk pastels as well. Chalk pastels are okay because they will go on nice and fine. And you're just going to take that and you're going to brush that over the screen and give it a little bit of a burnish. Another nice thing about powders is that you are on no timer. There is no time limit to how long you can work with the powders for, because they won't dry on the screen. And this is the gold one. I'm going to show that off. Now while I'm doing this, I do want to just say that powders tend to stain the screens a little bit, because it can be a little tricky to wash them out of your screen. So they generally leave your screens looking a little dirty, even if you do clean the powders off completely. So just bear that in mind when using powders on silk screens. They will leave a little bit of residue. Okay, and then this is the glitter. Let's see how that goes through. And you can see already that it's not really working its way through there. I've put on a decent amount, and this is because the particles are too big to go through the mesh that makes up the silk screen. Okay, and then I'm going to lift this up and we can see how that came out. Okay, and I don't have to worry about cleaning it right now. I'll show you how to do it later, but you can see here how you get a really nice quite strong pattern, and with the gold as well you get quite a strong pattern. It's a little more broken up, and with the glitter you have maybe one or two flecks that got through, but in general you're not going to get a very strong pattern, and also it risks clogging up your screen. And let me just show you that, because you will always get a slightly pixelated effect when it comes to powders. So hopefully you can see the mesh there. And if you do use silk screens on, if you do use powders through silk screens, at this point I would also recommend giving it a burnish. And this is to set the powders, because right now they're just sitting right on top of the clay there, and they have not been embedded into the clay at all, and they will smudge very easily. So this is a little trick to make sure that your powders stay put until you're able to apply a bit of varnish to really stabilize them. But you can see that that works quite well with screens. Just make sure that the powders are on the finer side. All powders should be okay so long as they're not glitter. Even fine glitter isn't going to work most of the time. Alright, and that takes, that about covers the powders. Okay, and now I'm going to move on to ink, more specifically alcohol ink. Now, in my opinion, I don't really recommend it, mostly because this will guaranteed stain your silk screen, and there really isn't a good way to clean it, because alcohol ink doesn't clean up well with water, and I generally recommend using isopropyl alcohol to clean it, but isopropyl alcohol will melt your silk screen, so never use isopropyl alcohol to clean your screens, and I will demonstrate what that looks like later on. But it means that the ink will be permanently on your screen. So if you plan on using that screen with only one color palette, then it's fine, because then later projects won't be compromised by the fact that you used the alcohol ink. But in general, it just makes a bit of a mess. Now I'm going to show you it. And also another reason why I don't particularly like it is because it tends to leak through the screen and won't give you a very clean image anyway. So it can be a nice result. So again, if you're going to be using the screen for blues in the future and never use reds with it, it should be perfectly fine, but not the thing that I would recommend the most. I'm just going to quickly tap that around. So so that it leaks through, or not leaks through, but just so that I transition it into the white areas. Okay, and then I only lift it once it's dried because it will really leak through the screen otherwise, so I will leave it for about 15 seconds after having finished dropped the colours on, and then lift it up. Just bear with me for a moment while I grab this. There we go. And lift it up. And you can see there how it will leave a pattern, but it also really leaks under the screen. So it might be an effect that you like, but it needs to be a silkscreen that is now dedicated to alcohol ink, and specifically that color palette of ink. And then the best way to clean it really is to just grab a baby wipe and to dab the surface to get rid of as much of the ink as possible. But beyond this, you can't really clean it. And you need to be very, very careful because you have put a small amount of ink on the screen, and it makes the screen very delicate for a short amount of time. So no scrubbing with anything. Okay, and that's essentially what it looks like if you were to put ink through a silkscreen. Okay, and that about covers it for single layered silkscreens. Single layer silkscreens. Now I'm going to go into depth on how I work with layered silkscreens. And I'm going to be using this koi fish one because this one I've used a number of times. And what you want to do is you want to start off with the first layer, and let's see, I'm going to use this spot right over here, and you want to again just pop that down. The first layer is essentially the same as your as when you're working with regular silkscreens, and you're going to pop your paint down. Now very quickly before I do that, this is one of those instances where I recommend going with this kind of consistency of paint, the same consistency as this one that was shown, rather than the thicker paints, because I find that the thicker paints end up being a little tacky after they have dried, and when you put the second layer silkscreen down, it generally will pick it up a lot more if it's tacky. So I really do recommend going with this consistency where it dries not shiny. That's the best way to tell actually. Let me bring over those silkscreen to pieces from before. If you look at this one, hopefully you can see that it is completely matte. The only shiny areas are where the clay is still exposed. The actual paint itself, when you touch it, should feel completely matte. If I bring over this one from before, hopefully you can see that the paint actually has quite a shine to it. And when you touch it, it is sticky. Like if I place my fingers there, it will stick to my fingers. And that's fine when it's a single layer silkscreen, because you're not putting anything else over the top, and so it's not going to lift the paint up. But when you are working with layered silkscreens, that can be a problem. So the best tip I can give is if it sticks to your fingers to the point where it will just stick completely, then it's too sticky for layered silkscreens. So I'm going to demonstrate this with the correct consistency of paint. And just popping that down. And again, just like before, very nice and simple, straightforward. You're just going to take that screen over the top, leaving a nice layer of paint. Then lift that up and clean it off, and you want to give this at least 10 minutes to dry. Okay, and here it is completely dry, and it should not be sticky to the touch at all. And then furthermore, I would recommend grabbing a piece of paper and just giving it a quick burnish, and this will tell you if the paint is too sticky because it will actually stick to the paper. And if you lift that up, that's nice and clean. It will also burnish the clay down onto the, it will have burnished the paint down onto the clay. Also, your silk screen that you move onto should be completely dry. You should be able to run your hands over it. It shouldn't be sticky. It should be nice and dry. Then you're just going to line that up as best you can to the original image. And just give me a moment to do that, depending on how complex the silkscreen design is. It can take a little bit to get that lined up. There we go. Then you're going to give it a very quick burnish. Do not over burnish it because you don't want the screen sticking to the paint. Also, the same applies if you are using powders instead of paint. Then I'm going to grab again the same kind of paint, same brand again, but this time it's a different color. And I'm going to swipe that over the surface, making sure that I have a good layer of paint going through the screen, like so. And then we're going to pull that silk screen up, and that should give you a perfectly clean pattern. You can see there that no paint has stuck to the silk screen. Okay, and I'm just going to bring over another one, and I'm going to show an example of what can go wrong with layered silk screens. And this is basically the same thing. I've silk screened again. I haven't let the paint dry as long, so it's a little tacky on my fingers, and I'm not going to burnish it down. I've also got this silk screen, and it is dry, but it is not completely dry. It's slightly damp, and hopefully the camera can pick up that it feels softer than the silk screen that I showed before. You should be able to you'll be able to tell the difference when you feel it. And I'm going to lay that over the top again, getting it just about in the right spot. Give it a quick burnish down, and then I'm going to apply the paint again. And I'm going to silk screen over, and we're going to see. Sometimes the paint will stick if the silk screen is a little on the stickier side, or especially if it hasn't been burnished down, or if the underlying paint layer has not dried. And that one actually came out clean, which is typical when I'm trying to demonstrate something. Let me go clean that quickly. Alright, it did pull up a little bit. You can see some areas right over here where the paint did pull up, but sometimes it can take large swaths of the underlying layer up with it. It doesn't always happen. The biggest way to avoid that is to get the correct consistency of paint, and again, the best thing that I can recommend is getting a paint that when it dries it is matte. Let me bring that over. As you can see when I demonstrated with this, nice and matte, not sticky. If your paint is shiny upon drying, that is the incorrect type of paint and will most likely result in your pattern being lifted up when you're using layered silk screens. Other tips are upon the first layer drying, the black layer that is, again, as I said, burnish it with a piece of paper. Another thing that you can do also is to give a very light dusting of cornstarch, and what that does is it creates a non-stick surface, so that when you put the silk screen down to apply what would be the red layer in this case, it won't stick to the underlying layer. But yeah, basically the best way to avoid your silk screens from pulling paint layers up is to use the correct type of paint. And if you are using the incorrect type of paint, you can apply a little bit of cornstarch, but it's probably not going to work. Also, make sure that when you apply the second silk screen that it is completely dry. You don't want it to be damp at all, because then it can rehydrate the underlying layer of paint and make it stick to the silk screen. But yeah, generally it is the consistency of paint that makes the biggest difference. Alright, let me pop that to the side. One more thing, now that I think about it as well, is it also can depend on the brand of clay that you're using. Some clay brands don't react very well to water and can become sticky. Off the top of my head, Pardo is one of them, and I do believe Cernit is one of them, where if you apply a layer of paint and it's a little on the wetter side of things, it can make the clay a little sticky, and that can also introduce problems. So it can depend on the brand. Kato, Primo and Souffle are perfectly fine. I also think it might be Fimo that reacts to water. It might not be the Cernit, it might be the Fimo. I'm not 100% on it, but keep in mind it can also be the brand of clay if you are encountering problems. Alright, and that's just about it for what you can do with the silkscreen. I am going to go into how to clean them in a moment, but before I do that, I want to go over some of the mistakes that you can make when using silkscreens. The first one, and quite a common one, is over burnishing your clay or your silkscreen onto your clay. What you want to do is you want to rub very lightly over the surface. Just give it a gentle rub like so. You don't want to be doing anything like using, for instance, a roller to roll it. And yes, the silkscreen is going to get damaged, but it's for science. If you roll your silkscreen like so, giving it quite a rough burnish, what happens is the clay actually will come up into the screen's mesh, and a lot of the time that can end up with your silkscreen getting clumped or clumped. It will end up with clay stuck in the mesh. It also won't end up with as nice a pattern because the paint has nowhere to go. This is a completely flat surface, and you'll find that it will give a more meshy look. And let's see if this does clog the screen. I want to see. I got lucky that time. I have a little bit of clay stuck here. Hopefully the camera can pick up there that you've got little white particles. Actually, I got quite a bit stuck in the screen there. And what happens is it will be fine the first time, but the next time you try and screen with this silk screen, it's all gumped up, and so the paint won't go through it again, and you'll end up with a very patchy pattern. So don't over burnish your clay. If when you are burnishing your silk screen and you lift it away and you come out with any kind of pattern, hopefully that is picking up on camera, you've burnished way too hard. You should not be able to see any actual texture from the screen. If you do, you've over burnished and should be doing a lighter job than that. And unfortunately, if you do end up doing this, there isn't really a way to get that clay out of the screen. I still haven't found a way to salvage it, so definitely under burnish more than over burnish. The worst thing that's going to happen is that your paint bleeds a little bit under your screen, and that you can clean up and it doesn't damage your screen at all. So definitely err on the side of caution there. Alright, and then another problem is letting paint dry on your silk screen, and I'm going to show a little example there. This is a screen that is going to get damaged, but again, that's fine. I'm going to apply a little bit of paint, and how this can happen is if you are going in and being very particular about your pattern, like let's say you want to actually have a little bit of a specific pattern and you're adding in little bits of color, and then you have another paint, let's say I leave that now and I bring over another color, and all the time this is busy sitting and drying, and then you go in with that color. And also when you're doing this, you generally have a lighter coat of paint as well, which means that it will dry even faster than it would usually when you use a card swipe. And if you are using a runny consistency of paint, that will dry even faster. Also take into account your environment. If you're in a hot environment, your paint's going to dry really quickly. So if you are experiencing this problem, try working in an environment that is somewhat cold, a humid environment also really works as well, because it will keep the moisture in the paint. But I'm going to leave that for half a second or two, or more like I'll leave it about 10 seconds and I'll show you what happens. Okay, and I've left this just long enough to clean up and clean my brush, which is something that can very easily happen, but something that you want to avoid when working with silk screens. When working with screens, especially when it comes to paint, they are the top priority. You want to get the paint on, the silk screen lifted, and then in the sink and cleaned before moving on to anything else. And that is the best way to avoid potential problems, such as paint drying in the screen. And you can see there how it has dried in the screen. Hopefully, let me see, where can I show? Over here. I'm not sure how well it can show, but the paint will stick in the screen, and again, like when you over burnish the clay into the screen, it again will clog your screen and make it difficult to work with. I'm going to take this over to the sink and show you how to clean it. You can clean it to a degree. It's easier to take care of than the over burnishing problem, but it still will ultimately damage the screen and make it not as nice as it was originally. Alright, now I'm going to try to show this the best that I can. What I have here is a regular silk screen. I've just lifted it up off the clay. The paint is still nice and wet. I'm going to take it over to the sink. I'm just going to dip it in, and what I will do then is I'll place it on a surface that is like a ceramic tile, and then I'll take a nail brush, and it's important to make sure that you are brushing the matte side, not the shiny side of the silk screen. The shiny side you don't touch. The matte side you can take a nail brush with and gently go over the surface, and this will remove a lot of the paint. And then let me just bring that back over. Just want to position this so that you can see everything. There we go. Just going to take that, pop that in the sink again, and that is all there is to it. That's very nice and simple, easy way to clean your screens. And do that immediately upon having lifted it from the clay, because then the acrylic paint won't have set on it, because even if you do let it sit in the water, the acrylic paint will still continue to set and will stain your screen and ultimately get clumped in it. Now, if you have a silk screen where the paint is dry on it, what you're going to do is you're going to place that into the water. Do not let it soak more than about 30 seconds. You're going to grab the nail brush again, make sure that it is the matte side every time, and you're going to go over it. And generally this can clean a lot of the paint, and then just keep wetting. And actually I was brushing the wrong side of the screen there. There. If it's the matte side, you can be quite rough with it, so long as it is the matte side. And even then you can lift off a lot of the paint. It's going to be difficult to get rid of all of it though. Right there. Okay, and you would continue doing that, dipping it in every once in a while, and then continue brushing it. And if you're very careful and you haven't let the silk screen soak at all, you can very lightly brush over the back. Do this very, very lightly, and I would only recommend this if you've got paint or clay stuck in the screen and it's already somewhat damaged, because this can damage the back of the screen. But the front side, which is the matte mesh side, you're good to just sit and scrape as much as you need to try to get it as clean as possible. Okay, put that to the side, and the same goes for whenever you're working with powders. Dip that into your sink, give it a good old wash, and then give it a quick run over, and that should clean it right on up. There, you can see. And I'm doing those very quickly. I would spend a little more time on things like that, but yeah. Alright, now I'm going to bring over a screen that has been sitting and soaking for about 5 to 10 minutes. And I'm going to show you why you don't want to let your screen soak for too long. If you let them soak too long, the back becomes very delicate, and I'm not sure if you can see this here, but the blue, the actual backing will start to become unstuck from the mesh, and it means that even the lightest touch, depending on how long it's been soaking, will end up damaging the screen. So only let your screen soak for about a minute to 2 minutes. Any longer than that and it's going to cause problems. If your screen warps a lot when you're going to scrape it, that means that it's been soaked a little too long, and you'd be better off just letting that sit and drying a little bit before messing with it too much. You can wipe off any paint that's on the surface, but don't mess with it too much if it's over soaked. Okay, and then whenever you're drying them, you want to make sure that you know which side is the shiny side and which side's the matte. It dries matte side down, because if you dry it with the shiny side down, the shiny side can become stuck to the surface and can damage the screen because it will be stuck once it's dried. And the very last thing that I want to go over is if your silkscreen accidentally dries on top of itself, or potentially with another silkscreen on top of it, they will end up sticking together. At this point, do not try to separate it. You're going to pop that into a sink of water for at least a minute, and you're going to let that silkscreen soften right on up. And then once it's been softened, I've allowed this to sit and soften for a bit, then you're very gently going to peel that up. If it sticks at all, pop it back into soak. But you should be able to fix that problem by letting it sit and soak. That will release the adhesive between the two screens and will mean that you can separate it with little to no damage to these screens. The best way to avoid it is to not let them dry on top of each other or fold it over in any way, but that is something that you can do if you find that that issue arises. And then again, make sure that you dry it with the shiny side facing up. And that is just about it for how to use silkscreens. And I did go over quite a lot in this tutorial, so if you have any questions, please do leave them in the comments below and I will answer them as soon as possible. And if you have any that weren't answered in this video, please do leave them there as well, and I'm quite happy to answer those as well. I hope that this didn't discourage you in any way when it comes to silkscreens. They're quite easy to use when you know the do's and don'ts when it comes to them. But in general, they're quite easy to use. You can get some fantastic results with them. Biggest things to note is to get the correct consistency of paint. If you want a guarantee, get this brand of paint. I highly recommend it. I've never had problems with it. Don't let your silkscreen soak for longer than is necessary, no longer than 2 minutes, because then it becomes quite delicate. Don't clean it with isopropyl alcohol, because that will just end up melting the screen. If you're using paints, work quickly. It doesn't need to be super duper fast, but try to work as quickly as possible. But yeah, other than that, they're pretty easy to use, and even if you do end up staining them a little, more often than not, it doesn't actually cause problems later on. So yeah, have fun, play around with your silkscreens. There are so many different ways to use them. I have lots of tutorials on the channel that actually go into projects where I show how to use these fantastic tools for polymer clay. So consider checking those out if you're looking for ideas. And yeah. Again, if you have questions, leave them in the comments below. And if you like this video, leave a like and subscribe, as I do videos just about every day. If you have suggestions for future tutorials, leave them in the comments, and they'll probably become a video in the future. And again, I do hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.